Okay, our learning is Lili Nishmas Mendel, Mariam Bas Kalman Ruvin, her Neshama Shav and Aliyah. Okay, and we are on the top of Mem Daled Amud Aleph by the two dots. Yes, this is the last line of the Mishnah. Whenever you see those two dots surrounded by two, like a short line surrounded by two dots on each side, it's basically going back. It's a quote from the earlier Mishnah, and these are the last lines of the last Mishnah, which was talking about the candle and it was the introduction to some of the laws of Muktzah, which we're going to be discussing for the next couple of days. So, the Mishnah said that we're not allowed to benefit from the oil since it wasn't prepared for Shabbos use. So, where the Mishnah is talking about the oil that dripped out of the candle, right? Again, the Mishnah was talking about a case where we have a candle and it's spilling oil. So a person wants to place a plate under it. We talked about the fact that the permissibility about doing so, but the point is that the oil that now comes out cannot be used. That oil, let's say now you want to go ahead and use that oil for a salad or whatever, can't do it. Tanar Rabbanan, we have a brisa which elaborates on this law. It says, Moser Hashem Shemaner Visha Beka'ara Aser, that both the leftover oil, but that's both in the lamp itself and in the bowl, all that oil is forbidden. Why? Again, because that oil was designated for use on Shabbos. Now again, so there's this idea of muktzah, which basically says that if something is designated for a specific use, for a non-Shabbos use, it cannot be used for all of Shabbos. Even though the candle goes out, you have this leftover oil, why can't I use it? It's going to go to waste. I want to use it for my salad. Too bad. Rav Shimon, Matir. Rav Shimon, though, once again, Rav Shimon and Rav Yehuda. Now we know, we're never going to forget. Rav Shimon and Rav Yehuda, right? Rav Shimon has the broad, expansive view of muktzah. The opposite. He has the broad, expansive view of what is allowed to be done. He's able to hold on to much more things like the shin, and therefore he says it is not muktzah. Granted, it was designated for use, but now it's not longer being used for a candle, and therefore I'm allowed to use the oil, and that is the view of Shimon, who, again, in the terminology of the Gemara, it says leislei muktzah. Literally means he doesn't hold a muktzah. That's not entirely true. He holds a muktzah, but he doesn't hold. To him, muktzah is only going to be applicable in very, very few cases, or more limited cases, and he allows moving many more things. Okay, that's the end of that discussion. Now we start a new Mishnah, and here we're going to be introduced to a couple of new concepts of muktzah. So one is a concept of muktzah machmas mius, something that is muktzah because of the fact that it's disgusting. In other words, when something is disgusting, we typically don't want to touch it. So if something was disgusting, that would be muktzah. It would be, at least we'll see, at least there are going to be opinions that if something is something which typically people will not want to engage in, then the assumption is, again, muktzah means almost like to be set aside. So if it's something which you typically would think people are not going to be engaging in because it's disgusting, that would therefore fall into the category of muktzah, and you would not be able to move it. Okay, we're going to discuss some of the practical elements of that. That's one form of muktzah. The other muktzah that we're going to be discussing here is kli shemlachto le'isser, a utensil which is designated for forbidden use, but also has some permitted uses. Okay, a classic example of that is like a hammer. A hammer is the example that's given in the Gemara. Oftentimes, a hammer is primarily used to hit nails, and that is davar asur. You can't build on Shabbos, but you could also use a hammer to go ahead and to crack open nuts, right? So that's a kli shemlach l'eser. Like scissors is a good example, right? So scissors, is used for asur things, but it's also could be used to open packages, right? Which would be a scenario which would be permitted. So that's a kli shemlach l'eser, and we're going to be discussing both of those things. So good. Let's begin in the Mishnah. Mitaltlin ner chadash avalo yashan. You're allowed to move a new lamp, but not an old one. What's the difference between a new lamp and an old one? An old lamp, and here we're not talking about a lamp that is lit. We're going to come back in a moment. We're going to discuss a lamp that's lit. We're talking about a lamp that is not lit. A new lamp is fresh. It's not disgusting. An old one, once it's used, the earthenware lamps, once they're used, you can't use them for anything else. Whereas a new lamp, if it wasn't used yet, certainly back in the day when they were much more, versatile about the utensils, or much more recycle minded because by necessity. Therefore, a new lamp which wasn't used for lighting, you might go ahead and use it to drink a tea. I don't know, whatever. They would use it for different things. They weren't so, but once it's used once, it becomes gross, disgusting, mius, and therefore a new one could be used. It's not disgusting yet. An old one, it's disgusting. That's the Tanna Kama's view. Rav Shimon Omer, Kol Haneros Metaltlin. Rav Shimon, again, who is always more lenient when it comes to muktzah, he says all lamps may be moved, both a new one and an old one. Clearly, Rav Shimon does not hold of this concept of muktzah machmas mios. He says the fact that it's not so pleasant, too bad. It's not too bad, but it's not a problem. He says, however, Rav Shimon says, Chutz min haner hadolik b'Shabbos. He does not allow moving a lamp that is still lit on Shabbos. So as long as the lamp went out, whether it started on Shabbos being lit, whether it wasn't lit on Shabbos at all, or even if it started Shabbos while it's lit, as long as it's not being used right now, as long as there's no fire in it right now, you are allowed to move that lamp. Okay? By that, yeah.
So even if it's lit,
Bein hashmashas. Correct. Correct. He would hold it's only when it's being lit that it's a problem. According to him, this notion of migudis katzai ben hashmashos, the fact that it's since it was muktzah ben hashmashos, therefore it's muktzah all of Shabbos, Rav Shimon doesn't hold to that. Now we don't pass like Rav Shimon, so that's why our candles will come back at the end. Hopefully, we'll have time. I'm looking at the clock that is still broken. We'll definitely have time. We'll come back to practically we don't pass like Rav Shimon, but we'll see some practical halachos about candles as well as flashlights, which we'll hopefully get to. Tana Rabbanan. So we have a brisa. Mitaltla ner chadash v'lo yashan. Okay, so this brisa is going to be like an elaboration on our Mishnah, and we'll see we introduce it to some new views. So the Tanakam, the first opinion says mitaltla ner chadash v'lo yashan. You're allowed to move a new lamp, but not an old one. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Now that aligns perfectly with the Tanakama, the first Tana of our Mishnah. So now, even though in our Mishnah it was stated anonymously, we now know that the author of the opinion in our Mishnah, which said, you may move a new lamp but not an old one, that is Rabbi Yehuda speaking. Okay, so that's the author of the first opinion in our Mishnah. And then Rabbi Meir Omer, Kol haneros metalslin, everything could be moved, chutz min haner shidliku bo b'Shabbos, unless it was lit when Shabbos began. So here he's holding like what Ross was holding. In other words, he is not holding, he's not distinguishing between new and old. He says even if it's old, it's fine. But if it was lit when Shabbos began, you can't move it. Why? Because, again, the terminology that's used by the Gemara is migudis katzai, ben hashmashos, since it was muktzah, ben hashmashos, that defines its muktzah status all of Shabbos. So our Shabbos candles that were lit ben hashmashos, Rameir is basically telling us over here, right, they're not earthenware, they're nice, they're pretty, whatever. You can't use it all of Shabbos since it was muktzah ben hashmashos. And that's the opinion we actually rule like. And then Rav Shimon Omer, chutz min haner hadolek b'Shabbos, right? Except for a lamp that was still burning on Shabbos, right? But according to Rav Shimon, once the light goes out, you are allowed to use it, right? So Rabbi Yehuda distinguishes between new and old. Rav Meir does not distinguish between new and old, but he says, but if it's lit right now, you can't use it. If as long as it was lit when Shabbos began, you can't use it. And Rav Shimon says, as long as it's lit right now, you can't use it, but once it is extinguished, you could use it.
Right,
and
Rav Meir is saying, what did Shahid Likubo? It sounds like it was lit on Shabbos.
No, you're right. That is a most accurate translation, but I don't think that's what it means. Shilikubo b'Shabbos. It was. You're right. That is the more technical translation. We're reading as long as it was lit on Shabbos. In other words, ben hashmashos, when Shabbos began. Okay, and then the brisa continues. Kavsa mutal tatzla. According to Rav Shimon, once it goes out, you are allowed to move the candle. Again, that's Rav Shimon's view. Even though it was muktzah ben hashmashos, once it goes out, you're allowed to move the candle. Aval kos uka'ara v'ashashis. But regarding a cup, a bowl, and a beaker, okay, different type of utensils, lo yizizim imkom, you cannot move them. We'll come back to why seemingly that line sounds like Rav Shimon speaking, and he somehow is distinguishing between a candle and a fire that's put into a cup, bowl, or beaker. We'll see what in the world is the distinction between them. Okay, and then Rabbi Eliezer ben Rav Shimon Omer, the son of Rav Shimon, Rabbi Eliezer ben Shimon says, "Mistabek min haner hakaveh." Not only are you allowed to use oil of a light that was extinguished, but you're also allowed to take oil from a lamp that is in the process of going out. Umin hashemen hamitaftif. And from oil that's dripping from a lamp, vafilu b'shasha ner dolek, even while the lamp is burning. So the last view is the most lenient view. This is the son of Rav Shimon. He takes his father's view and goes even more lenient. His understanding is as follows. Rav Shimon said, while the light is burning, you can't move it, and you also can't take the oil from it. Why? Because it's going to cause it to extinguish. His son says, but if it's already in the process of extinguishing, then it's not a problem. The whole problem, he says, is only when it's burning bright, then when you take some oil out, it's going to cause because there's now less oil, it might cause the light to be a little bit less bright. But if you go ahead, once it's already dimming, it's already like flickering out, you're allowed to start taking oil because it's not going to impact it whatsoever. Okay, so again, Rabbi Eliezer and his father argue. Rav Shimon says only when it goes out. Rabbi Eliezer says even when it's going out, you're allowed to use it. It's not really going to impact the candle. Okay. Now the brisa. Now we analyze the last view. Amar Abaye, Rabbi Eliezer, Rav Shimon, Savala Kavuha bechada upaligala bechada. Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rav Shimon, agrees with his father regarding one point, and he disagrees regarding the other. Meaning, Savala Kavuha bechada deleisle muktzah. He agrees with his father in the sense he does not accept the broadest application of muktzah. Whereas Rabbi Meir says that once it was muktzah at ben hashmashos, it's going to be muktzah for all of Shabbos. And Rabbi Eliezer and his father, meaning he agrees with his father and says, no, once the fire goes out, it's no longer muktzah. If he disagrees with one, in lo kava lo. His father holds that it's only after the fire goes out that you're allowed to use the oil. If you savar afagav lo kava, he holds that even when it did not go out entirely, you're allowed to use the oil. Okay, it just spells out what I think we kind of spoke out, that Rabbi Eliezer is agreeing with his father regarding one point, but not about both points. And now we go back to that line, which was a little strange, which was Rav Shimon tells us that you are allowed to use the candle after it goes out, but then he says, when it comes to a cup, a bowl, a beaker, you are not allowed to move them. Maishtahani. Why are those different? What's the difference between a fire that's in a cup or a bowl and a fire that's in a lamp? Why by a lamp he says it could be used when it goes out, and by a cup he says it can't? So Amar Ula, Seifa Asan Rabbi Yehuda. So Ula comes along and tries to say that even though it sounds like that line is a continuation of Shimon, really it's going back to the first opinion. Okay, now this is not the most cleanest way to read something. Again, let's just review the Bryce. The Bryce said, Rabbi Yehuda said, you can't go ahead, you could use a new one, you can't use an old one. Then Rameir said, you could use all candles unless it was lit while during Shabbos. Rav Shimon says, you can't use one while it's still lit, but after it's extinguished, you could move it. And then the next line goes back to the first opinion and says, a cup, a bowl, a beaker cannot be moved. Okay, now the Gemara questions this immediately. Maskal Mar Zitra, ihachi mayaval. Aside from the weird placement, because normally you would have one opinion and you'd follow it all the way through, but the words however don't even read. In other words, even if you want to somehow move the words around and put those words back to Rav Yehuda, why does it say however? In other words, it doesn't really flow from his words. He says you can move a new lamp, you can't move an old one. However, a cup, a bowl, and a beaker that were filled with oil, you can't move. It doesn't read. Se'ela, Marzudra says no. La'olam Rav Shimon, really this is the view of Rav Shimon. It's a continuation of Rav Shimon. V'chikashar Rav Shimon, when does Rav Shimon allow? Again, Rav Shimon is of the opinion that even though the candle was lit when Shabbos began, once it goes out, I'm allowed to use it. When is that true? Bener Zuta Dedaite Ilave. That's for the small candle, because the person is thinking it's going to go out on Shabbos. In other words, now we're limiting Rav Shimon a little bit. We thought Rav Shimon said that we thought he was making a very broad, sweeping statement. When the candle is lit, you can't move it. When it goes out, you're allowed to move it. Now we're seeing it's not exactly what he holds. What he holds is when the candle is lit and when Shabbos began, you assumed that the fire was going to go out, i.e. a small candle, then you're allowed to use it. But if, keep in mind, back in the day, they would have these huge candles all over, because why would they bother, we have light, they're going to go fill it up over and over again? No, they had these big things, that would be a lamp. If it's a larger thing, which it's possible it's going to be on for all of Shabbos, there Rav Shimon would not allow it. In other words, part of Rav Shimon's allowance for the candle that goes out is also because you assumed, since it was a small candle, it's going to go out on Shabbos, and therefore I'm going to move it. But a large candle, right, a very large one, 24-hour candle, there he's not going to allow, because you, when you started Shabbos, did not think that it was going to go out on Shabbos, and therefore you were mekatze it. You basically made it muktzah in your mind. You didn't think you were going to use it, and that's the distinction. Nair, yes, because a nair we're assuming is a small candle that's going to go out at the end of the evening. Whereas a bowl, a much larger, let's say a mixing bowl, that's much larger. You don't know if it's going to be going out by the end of Shabbos. And therefore, if Shimon would say that's muktzah, since I didn't have in mind when Shabbos began, explicitly or implicitly, that I'm going to be able to use this thing. Yeah.
It's like the trash can.
It's like the trash can. Exactly. Very good. Yeah. Avalhani to the fishilo, these, the bowl, the cup, the beaker, they're all large, and therefore they would be muktzah even according to Rav Shimon. Ask the Gemara, Vatanya, we have a brisa which seems to tell us Rav Shimon allows a bowl. Why? Because it says, Moser Hashem and Shebaner Vishibeka'ara Aser, the leftover oil in a lamp, okay, a lamp is small, or in a bowl is prohibited. Rav Shimon Matir. And Rav Shimon says the leftover oil in the cup and in the bowl is permitted. So you see, there Rav Shimon allows oil that's left over in a bowl, right? And the bowl we're assuming is large. The Gemara answers no. Hasam ka'ara dumya dener, hacha ka'ara dumya dekos. There are different size bowls. There's small bowls, there's baby bowls, there's mixing bowls, right? So in the scenario where he allows it, that's the baby bowl. That's a soup bowl. That's small. It's going to go out by the time Shabbos is over. When it said it's aser, meaning our mission over here, the brisa which we started off with, which said Rav Shimon does not allow a bowl, that was talking about a large bowl. Okay? So basically so now we're limiting Rav Shimon's view a little bit. He does not hold across the board that when the fire goes out it's permitted. Rather he holds that when the fire goes out in a candle which you could have safely assumed would be extinguished on Shabbos, that's when it's permitted. But when you didn't think it was going to go out on Shabbos, i.e. was a lot of oil, it would be forbidden. Yes?
Okay. So it seems like we've been interchangeably going between whether it's the use of the vessel itself, the nair itself, or the shemen, right? The actual leftover.
It's the same principle.
It would be the same for each.
Correct.
Because as long as it's not enough
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, a little further, and how we get to candles that are similar to our candles. Amar Rav Zera, Pamot Shidliku Shabbos, a metal candlestick which was lit on Shabbos. Okay, so more similar to ours, right? I think most of us have, metal candlesticks. L'divrei hamatir aser. According to Rameir, who said you're allowed to use a used lamp, it's forbidden to move this metal candlestick. What does he mean? What he means is that since it was lit when Shabbos began, it's forbidden to move, right? In other words, like our candles, you would not be allowed to move, even though it's metal, does not make a difference. L'divrei oser mutter. Okay, this is the more complicated view. According to the one who forbids using a used lamp, right? That was the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda was the one who said that muksa machmas mios, that if something is disgusting, meaning it was a used lamp, he holds it's permitted to move a metal candlestick, even though it was lit when Shabbos began. Okay, that would imply that Rabbi Yehuda holds that a kli shemalachtu le'isser, a utensil, which is used for a forbidden purpose, is permitted, right? Because he's saying that this metal candlestick could be moved. Now the Gemara immediately asks this, questions this. L'meimra Rabbi Yehuda muktzah machmas mios islay. Is it so that Rabbi Yehuda accepts the concept of muktzah? This we know. So Rabbi Yehuda, you're telling me holds muktzah machmas mios. Fine, that's cool. Muktzah machmas isser leisle. You want to tell me that he does not hold of muktzah, of something that is muktzah because it's being used for a prohibited purpose? V'atan, you have a brisa which states explicitly that he does. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, kol hanera shamateches metaltlin. All metal lamps can be moved on Shabbos, chutz min haner shidliku b'Shabbos, unless it was a lamp which was lit for Shabbos. Clearly, he holds that a utensil which was designated for a forbidden use, and it was used for forbidden use, it's forbidden. So Eli Itmar, Hachi Itmar. Really, okay. So really, you have to reread Rav Zera. We misheard Rav Zera. This is what he said. Rav Zera. Pamot shiliko la b'Shabbos, a metal candlestick which was lit for Shabbos. Divrei hakol aser. Both Rameir and Rav Yehuda both hold that it is forbidden. Why? Because it's muktzah machmas. It's because klishim lachla iser. It's utensil that is designated for a forbidden purpose. Okay, so that's like our candlesticks. They were lit when Shabbos began. It's forbidden. Lohi liko alav. If it was not lit, divrei hakol mutter. Everyone's going to agree that it's mutter when it's a metal candlestick as opposed to a earthenware candlestick. But with a metal one, since a metal one is not disgusting, that could be used for other purposes, and therefore, if it wasn't lit when Shabbos began, you'd be allowed to move it. Now, practically speaking, let's take some practical halachas from here. So our candlesticks on Shabbos that are lit for Shabbos, once they're lit, when Shabbos began, you cannot move those candlesticks. If a person wants to be able to move their candlesticks on Shabbos, what we do is we put our candlesticks on a tray. Okay, and then make that. Now the tray itself is now a basis, which we started talking about. A basis l'davar aser. It's literally a base for something which is forbidden. So what do? You make it a basis for something which is forbidden and permitted. You have to make it a basis for something which is both permitted and forbidden. And once it's a basis for both, and there is at least equal / better, more important benefits for the davar mutter, then it's allowed. You're allowed to move the basis. Now that's important. In other words, you can't just put a random thing on it. It has to be something you actually need to use later. So for example, a challah roll, which you're going to need for Shabbos day, would be a good thing to put there. A watch, which you're going to want the next day, you can put there. But if it's like a random toy that you don't care about, that's not going to allow us. In other words, whenever you have a basis, so a good example of this, let's just, we have some extra minutes, so let's talk about a basis for a second. A basis for davar mutter and davar aser is when the only when you're allowed to use it is when the davar mutter is something that you really have need for. Okay, so a drawer is a great example of that. You have your drawer that's filled with pens. Okay, that's a basis davar aser, but it's also filled with clips for your bags. Okay, so that's a davar mutter, right? So in that case, if I need those clips, so by definition, those clips are now for me subjectively more important. This is machlokes poskim, but we'll go with where Moshe is lenient on goes the more lenient view. Since I need those clips for me, even though the value of the pens, I could have pens. I could have stacks of cash in there, $1,000 of cash. But I also have a glasses cleaner, and I hate when my glasses are smudged. So that glasses cleaner to me on Shabbos is more valuable than the $1,000 that are in there, and therefore it's a basis davar aser mutter, and I need and it's machlokes poskim. Rav Moshe is lenient. I need the what's it called, the glass cleaner. I'm allowed to open it. I'm allowed to move the basis. So similarly with the candlestick tray, I have to put something which I actually have a need for. I can't just put a random thing. I have to put something which I need, and then according to most poskim, I'll be allowed to move those the tray when the candle goes out. While the candle's still on, there's an extra concern that I'm going to cause the fire to extinguish. Okay, and therefore I can't move it. That's the main reason it's brought. I'm not allowed to move it while the fire is still lit. Now, the question is, what about a flashlight? Okay, is a flashlight similar to candles or not? Now, is there a concern it's going to get extinguished? Not really. Nonetheless, Rav Moshe, Rav Shlomo Zalman were machmir about regular flashlight, old school flashlights, saying you cannot move it. It's too similar to a candle, and therefore people might think, just like I can move a flashlight, I can move a candle, and therefore they forbade it. However, our modern day flashlights, virtually all of them, as far as I know, are all made with LED lights, which we will point out over and over again as we get to other halachos, are not the same as a fire. LED lights, halachically, a flashlight, old school incandescent light, that is a fire according to many, and you turn those on, it'd be Isser Daraisa. Whereas if you turn on an LED light, turn on these lights on Shabbos, it's still forbidden, but it's Durabanan because it doesn't generate the same level of heat and whatever, and therefore it's Durabanan. Therefore, most poskim say that a regular flashlight that was turned on before Shabbos, can't turn on a flashlight on Shabbos, that would be Isser Durabanan, but a flashlight that was turned on before Shabbos, you would be allowed to carry, right? So sometimes people are walking in the dark, want to walk home from shul or whatever, walk home from someone's house, and they want to have flashlights. It may look strange, people may be ignorant and think that they're doing something forbidden. It's 100% mutter, and certainly when there is the concern of like a blackout or things of that nature, you turn on the flashlight before Shabbos, and it's fine. You can walk around carrying it, no need to do any shinoi. It's not muktzah. Again, what is it? It's a kli shemalachto potentially l'isser that's being used. It's like a hammer that's being used to open nuts. It's a flashlight that I'm using for my own purpose. Okay, there are some who are machmir, but the bottom line is that many poskim allow it, and certainly in time of any need, which by definition that's where you're using a flashlight. We don't typically walk around with a flashlight. Okay, but so bottom line is fine. So again, we got it. Okay, no chazar. Fine. Have a great day. Max Hatzlacha covering for the next week. I will be recording the shiurim, God willing, hopefully in time for the regular time. And yeah, take care.